All right, so this is Remakes Reviews. We're talking about the original Rebecca from 1940, a Hitchcock film, and we're going to talk about the remake, directed by Ben Wheatley on Netflix, came out in 2020 last year. And with me is Marissa.
Hey everyone, my name's Marissa Carpio. I'm an actor and storyteller based in Brooklyn, New York. You can catch me in a few movies on Netflix, and as well as check out my website for stuff I've written and produced.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put the website in the description area so people can just click and head to your page.
Cool. Sounds great.
Let's start with a summary of the plot. I think let's do the original plot because I'm assuming that's most closely related to the novel it was adapted from.
Yes, I read most of the novel, and we'll get into that, why I said most of it. Then I realized, well, we're actually really comparing movies, so maybe
Right.
I didn't. But the novel's beautifully written, but there are things I want to bring up about that as well in relation to the movies.
Cool.
But yeah, the Hitchcock film does most closely resemble the novel. It's about a lower class English woman named who doesn't have a name. She's the narrator of the novel. Everything's through her eyes. And while working as a companion to a rich American woman in Monte Carlo, she meets Maxim de Winter, who is a I remember, okay, so we read the book in high school, my freshman year. And like an idiot, I asked my English teacher, what does the guy do for work? And he just looked at me like I was the biggest idiot. It was like, he's a landowner.
Okay, that's not a job anymore, really. Actually, it is a landlord.
Yeah, like a landlord, but owns land that people pay rent on and servants. So he's like a rich guy. Yeah. And because I should mention I'm a Filipino American, daughter of Filipino immigrants. So that wasn't, when I was 14, I didn't understand that was a thing. If that makes any sense, because we'll get into it later because it's what I want to bring up. But yeah, so she meets Maxim de Winter, who is a widower. His wife, Rebecca, who the novel and movies are named after, passed away a year before in an accident. And everyone loved Rebecca. She was like perfect wife, most beautiful human being, gracious hostess. Everybody loved her. So the narrator, who we'll call the second Mrs. de Winter, is constantly living in Rebecca's shadow. And when she moves in with Maxim after they get married, after a whirlwind romance in Monte Carlo, all the servants are like, you're trash, essentially.
Right. And you'll never measure up.
Exactly. Never measures up to Rebecca. And she believes that her husband is still in love with his old wife, his deceased wife, and that she'll never compare, she'll never live up to the image of her.
Yeah.
And it all sort of comes crashing down at this masquerade ball that they host. She decides to step up and be a proper lady of the house and host a masquerade ball. And Mrs. Danvers, the servant, who is one of the biggest Rebecca stans, let's just say, who's all like, I love Rebecca. Look at what she did in sleep, etc.
When you say you love her, do you mean...
Yeah, we will talk about that too. So Mrs. Danvers suggests that the second Mrs. de Winter wear this costume, and she comes down the stairs. Maxim gets furious, tells her to take it off. Apparently, Rebecca had worn that the year before. So the second Mrs. de Winter, the narrator, is all like, he didn't want to see me in it, blah, blah, blah. But then that same night, a ship crashes into the bay near their home, near Mandalay, their home. And they find a boat with Rebecca's with Rebecca's
decaying body. Yeah.
Exactly. When they sort of go to salvage the shipwreck. And so then, now in the book, Maxim confesses to his new wife that he hated Rebecca. She was cruel. The night of their marriage, she told him she's sleeping with other guys. She slept with all the guys in town, would make fun of him.
Doesn't plan on stopping.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And then told him that she might be pregnant. At the time of her death, she told him she's pregnant with one of her lover's children and was like, he's going to take over your estate. Now, in the book, Maxim de Winter shoots her, like she goads him into shooting her.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's when he freaks out, puts her body in a boat, puts holes in the boat and intends for it to sink. And the reason no one questioned it was because a body had washed up in like a lake 2 months later, and he identified it as Rebecca's body. But now that they've found the real Rebecca's body and the boat that she sank in, there's questions around her death. And essentially what happens is, after a huge investigation pushed by Rebecca's first cousin, also her lover, and the father of her potential child, which, woo, that's olden days, right?
Right. Yeah, I know. I was like, what is this set? Okay, 1930s. Okay.
Yes, pre-World War II. Basically, they find out that Rebecca actually had cancer and was dying of cancer, and had goaded Max into killing her because A, she didn't want to die a long, drawn out death because it was pretty far along, and B, she just wanted to fuck him over, and that was her last like way of trying to fuck him over. So they find out that she had cancer, so they assume that she committed suicide still because she didn't want to die a long, drawn out death. So at the very end of the book, they're driving back to Manderley at their home, and they're like, why is the sky bright? It's nighttime. And Mrs. Danvers set the house on fire because she didn't want to see them in that house, essentially being happy.
No happiness for them.
Exactly.
So I think it's interesting that in the book he shoots her, because that is what happens in the remake. And in the remake, I was like, I don't buy that. So it's interesting that that's more in line with the book than the Hitchcock version, where she like trips and hits her head on a rock or something, and
then because
which I thought was a better way to tell that story, especially if like this young innocent woman's supposed to be in love with him. If she finds out he killed somebody, I think that would ruin the whirlwind romance that they had, you know?
Yeah. So with the Hitchcock film, the studio said that he couldn't kill her because it didn't align with their moral code that they had in place at the time. So they were like, our romantic hero cannot be a murderer. Our audiences will not like it. Yeah. And I agree with that. But the reason it worked in the book is because you get the author's internal dialogue going and how she justifies that for herself because she loves this man. And the author herself, Daphne du Maurier, said that she wrote the book to be about a man in power, a man with power marrying a woman with little power. So you sort of lose that. You lose that in the remake. I didn't think, even though it's more faithful to the book in that way.
Yeah.
I just didn't buy her being like so in love with him that she forgives that.
Yeah. In both of them, I really struggled with feeling her like inner turmoil and her comparison to Rebecca, but it was like even less strong in the remake, where it just felt like she's being haunted and they're trying to make it more of a thriller without really explaining anything.
Exactly. So Hitchcock made it kind of more of a romance, like a gothic romance, and Wheatley was making it into more of a visceral thriller. Like he was really using images and like all the
and like nightmare sequences and
everything available to him as a modern filmmaker to try to make it a more visceral horror experience. But I don't think it worked.
No, I agree. And most people do. I was looking up on Rotten Tomatoes comparing the two, and like the 1940 Hitchcock version has 100% tomato meter, 92% audience score, and then the 2020 remake has like 39% tomato meter, and I think like 42% or something audience score. It's like, yeah.
And I will say I did love the Hitchcock film, and I'm not someone who's like a huge Hitchcock buff. I appreciate his films, but I'm not like obsessed with him. Or anything like that. I really liked that 1940 film, and I think a lot of it had to do with Laurence Olivier. I was like, holy shit, this guy is fucking attractive. And he makes that character so real, and he grounds the film in that character, and Joan Fontaine plays nicely off of that as well. I think her Mrs. De Winter, her second Mrs. De Winter, I bought the lack of confidence. I bought her naivety and her youth. It might have to do with the fact that she was like 23 at the time of filming, the same age as she is in the novel. But like that relationship made sense to me in the Hitchcock film.
I also think the way that they set it up in the Hitchcock version, where like she is this woman's assistant, the woman treats her fine. It's just like not the greatest life. Is very different than how they did in the remake, because, and I think it's also more believable that like this woman would let her take tennis lessons or whatever, and like, yeah, she's kind of being sneaky to go on these dates, but it's not like she's betraying her. Essentially, like they treated the woman she's assisting as like her master in the remake, which I thought was weirder and not as much as like a caretaker type role.
Yeah, and that's one thing I want to bring up, the issue of class, because Wheatley in the remake, the 2020 remake, he really hammered in class distinctions in that film, whereas I didn't get it. The Hitchcock didn't really do that at all. They just everyone just kind of looked down on her, and you just understood that relationship. But I felt like every other, like in every scene, there had to be some kind of reminder of her class.
Yeah, like Mrs. Danvers in the remake is like, oh, I had assumed you've been in a house this big because you were a servant for like a wealthy woman. I was like, okay, like we get it.
Exactly. He really hammered that nail on its head. I don't think that was necessary. But also in the novel, even from the get-go, inside the narrator's head, she could pick up on the behavioral microaggressions that other servants had towards her. So that's how class was discussed in the book. It wasn't like, you're low class. It wasn't like outwardly said to her. She just picked up on that. And I feel like the Hitchcock film did a better job of doing that. And as well, instead of the 2020 remake. But I kind of understand why the filmmaker would want to do that. And I'm not saying it was the right choice, but I understand why he would want to do that. Because Lily James is just doesn't, I didn't really buy her as, a lower class servant.
Right. Also, I think it's something about like her, it's almost like her face and like her accent makes her seem
posh.
Like So it's hard. And it's also the weird blonde hair distracted me from really paying attention to her character. Because it's like at one point, like you have dark roots, and another scene, it's a fully like blonde wig. And I was like, I'm distracted entirely by your character's presentation. So it's harder for me to pay attention to how you're acting now.
Yeah. She looked very modern, which confused me for a bit. I was like,
especially in some of the wardrobe. Yeah.
I was like, are they setting this in 1938? Are they trying to appeal to modern audiences with a more modern like look and haircut? So that's one thing. But also, I feel like class distinction in white society, let's just call it, isn't a thing nowadays.
Right.
So if you're gonna try to
it's like blue collar versus white collar, I think, is like the extent that we give it.
Yeah. You've got like hillbilly elegy, right? And then you've got like, and then you have a very distinct middle class. But like that class, it just how it was understood, how I assume it was understood in 1938, doesn't hit audiences. It's not something we really have as on our minds these days as audiences. So I think that's why the filmmaker wanted to really drive that home, to create the class distinction. But now here, I'm going to say this. I don't think that was the right choice for a 2020 remake. I'm going to go ahead and say they should have picked a person of color to play the second Mrs. De Winter if you want to do that class distinction. Because
you can make an easy parallel.
Exactly.
And it's something that we see in the news every day.
Exactly. Of a person of color trying to assimilate into sort of a white societal norm. I think that would have been a more interesting modern take if that's what he wanted to do. And you wouldn't have to have conversations about class every like 2 minutes.
Right. I also think like regardless, he could have been more subtle in the comments. Like I think in the original, she overhears like two of De Winter's friends talking about her and then enters the room, which I thought was like, okay, so we understand that people are thinking of her in this lower manner. And I think he could have done something like that instead of just like every 10 minutes reminding us, by the way, she doesn't come from money. She has no parents, this, that, the other.
Yeah. Yeah. The Hitchcock, I did like that scene in the Hitchcock film where they call her like a little chorus girl. Cause nowadays actors are like, Hollywood, it's just like royalty, right? But back then, we weren't really looked upon as like
anyone. Like a dreamer. Yeah.
I know. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it could have been modernized by putting, and I know people will cry identity politics, but I think it's actually if you want, so the thing with a remake, you want to make it, why do you do a remake in the first place, right? You have to feel like there's something culturally relevant to what's going on in the time that you're remaking it. And that would have been the smarter thing to do. That is what's culturally relevant now. Issues of race and how in America, race is the new hierarchy as opposed to class distinctions as it was back then. Right. So, and I understand the film's set in England, like it's in 1940. I mean, it's a different world, but it's also.
But you could have set it in. You could have even modernized it to be like in LA and be different neighborhoods. Like, I don't know where rich people live in LA, but.
All I know is Beverly Hills. I'm just like, sure.
Right. Let's say Beverly Hills. Yeah. Right. Like that's where Manderley could be. They could really modernize it and have made it like their own version instead of trying to do basically an exact remake that doesn't pull on your heartstrings or like really have any deeper meaning.
Yeah, exactly. Because as modern audiences, we don't feel class in that way. As opposed to when we see racial hierarchy, right? So I think that was that was an opportunity lost, but B, coming back to the question of why remake a movie in the first place, sometimes I'm like, this is going to be this might come off more extreme, but I'm going to repeat a tweet that I saw say when someone was like, when people want to revive old Broadway shows, it's like the MAGA of Broadway. Like it's like the Make America Great Again of Broadway. When you want to revive an old show and still use an all-white cast, you're like being nostalgic for a time when only white people were visible. So I do question that as well. And yeah, I'm a little obviously current events have me very fired up about conversations around race. We won't turn this into that. We're talking about movies, but at the same time,
But I mean, from the 2016 period on, when they presumably started making the movie, even for the director who's like a white guy, politics would be something that you can't avoid paying attention to. So I think it would have been very easy to be like, oh, okay, this is what we're globally talking about. How do I make this adaptation into something that can speak to like what's happening both in the US and abroad?
Exactly. Instead of just making another story about like white people problems and trying to get more sympathy for your main character by having people be like, you're poor.
We're like, okay.
Yeah. And it's just a different conversation now. And I understand. Yeah. If he's setting it in England in 1938, maybe not that, if you're going for historical accuracy, yeah, maybe not many people of color were running in those circles, but at the same time, sir, why are you remaking the movie then? Are you trying to revive some like ideal, like, I don't know. That's my question around all like why remake?
Yeah. What's the inspiration for Netflix to have remade it?
Yeah. I'm curious why they put their money behind it. And I'm kind of like, I know Netflix is their whole like strategy is just put out a crap ton of content out there and see what hits.
See what sticks.
Because if each subscriber only watches like 5% of the content that's out there, that makes up for it essentially.
Probably,
Yeah. So
that was our 5%. We're like,
I know, right? So yeah, I'm
yeah.
trying, like, people are always going to be like, stop making it about race, stop making it about identity politics. But I'm sorry, that's the conversation that's happening right now. That is the cultural point we're living in. And we're not going to move beyond it until we have these conversations. And our art needs to reflect that. Our storytelling needs to reflect that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely right. We can't move on until we actually do the work.
Exactly.
And we're not doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a big fault that this new remake could have just really.
No, I think you're right, because watching it, like I mentioned before we started recording, I had to take multiple breaks because I was just like so bored.
Me
and
too. I was like, this
not
is
at all
boring.
engaged. Yes. And it's like, you didn't need to make it 2 hours. I don't think the Hitchcock version needed to be 2 hours and 10 minutes, but he always likes to add like extra fluff. And I get that that's just what he does, is like add an extra 20 minutes because he loves that fast dialogue and whatever. So
yeah,
I
he showed
accept
Mrs.
it.
Danvers dying in the fire at the end.
Right.
I
Very
didn't
dramatic.
hate that. I know, I didn't hate that. Like,
right. But it's like, I didn't need to see it, but you know, I get why he does these things.
Yeah.
But the remake, it's like, oh my gosh, you're just dragging for no reason. Like, we're not getting anywhere.
Boring.
It was so boring.
You have like a wonderful actor, Kristen Scott Davis.
She was an excellent Mrs. Danvers.
I loved her as Mrs. Danvers. And I love that they gave. Here's another thing I kind of thought was weird about the Rebecca remake. They gave Mrs. Danvers more of a feminist point of view on a lot of things, by being like, Rebecca did what she wanted. Like, being like, so what if she slept around? That, like, she could do that. But it just didn't gel with the movie for me. It's an interesting take, and I did think about that while reading the book, but it just wasn't, the execution didn't hit me, you know?
But I think her acting is the only, her acting and the guy who plays Frank, like the house manager guy, I thought like those two were the only two particularly interesting actors who were believable in the roles that they were playing and who were most compelling to me.
Yes.
But yeah, the way that she made Mrs. Danvers like way creepier than she was to me in the original.
Yeah, this Mrs. Danvers was, I think she was older than the actress that played her in the original. And so with her feminist point of view, coming from her perspective of age, that made sense to me. That was interesting to me. I use feminist because I'm like, I don't know if killing people, like, I don't know. I don't call the movie a feminist movie. She just had that point of view that I could see they were trying to go with a more feminist point of view. Whereas in Mrs. Danvers in the Hitchcock version, I got huge lesbian vibes from her. I was like, she loves she loves Rebecca. Like, look at her take that coat and put it against her face. She loves her. And since she was younger, probably the same age as Rebecca. I don't know. Like, I was just like, I'm feeling those vibes. And I kind of that too.
In both films, but especially the first, like the way that she goes about Rebecca's room and is talking about the items feels a lot more like she is speaking about her forgotten lover, where in the remake it's more like, look at what Mrs. De Winter got for her. Look at what Mrs. De Winter got for her.
More so more so to criticize the second Mrs. De Winter, like, as opposed to being like,
and not like romanticize her memories. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, those are both very different takes on Mrs. Danvers, and I like them both.
Me too.
It's just in the remake, it just didn't gel within the rest of the story for me.
Right. So. But yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it's not the actor's fault, I'm sure, but I did like her performance. I thought it was great, and it surprised me at times, which was nice. But should we talk about the main characters, the leads?
So, let's talk about the leads.
Yeah. In the original, as you mentioned, Laurence Olivier and Joan, I don't ever remember her last name. Fontaine?
Yeah. She's actually, fun fact, she's Olivia de Havilland's sister. Olivia de Havilland from Gone with the Wind. Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny because there is a moment, I think it's like the dress that she wears to the Halloween party, that I thought, that reminds me of Gone with the Wind.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't look it up to like check like does this dress match that dress or is it just a vibe I'm getting? I don't know. But that would be interesting if it is
Yeah,
like
well,
a subtle nod.
yeah, because Gone with the Wind came out like a few years before that, 36, right?
I
So,
think so.
yeah.
Yeah. But their performances were excellent. And I think you're
Yes.
right that like they're a lot more believable in their power structure. And I think it's also that Maxim de Winter, he seems kind of cold, but he's not like cold and psychotic, which
Yeah.
is how I read him in
Um,
the remake.
yeah. Well,
And I don't know if that's because we know about the actor or if it's how the character was played.
yeah.
Um,
I
yeah.
I mean, I fell in love with Laurence Olivier the moment he stepped on that screen. I was just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God. Like that was just a presence and like a depth that
Yeah. Yeah,
I
his brooding is believable as well. It's not like I'm brooding because I have to be like brooding man. It's like I'm overlooking this cliff because I'm reminiscing about the past and you're like, "Oh, okay." That's
yeah,
why he's so short with her when she like pops up out of nowhere and disturbs
and it's like,
his
hey.
reminiscing. Yeah.
And
So it's like, okay, I understand where his internal motivation's coming from, but
exactly.
did
Army
not catch any of internal motivation in the remake.
I know. Like the thing with Army Hammer, I just never found him to be an interesting actor. I get it, like people used to find him handsome, but and Hollywood seems to have been making a huge push to get him.
I think that because he looks like he would have been a leading man in the golden age of Hollywood, Hollywood really wanted to push him now, but he doesn't make sense for now. He looks boring in my opinion. He
And he
is
is boring.
boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
the
it's
reason people liked him in Call Me by Your Name, he didn't really have to do much. Let's be honest. Like it's, I just, I don't. Yeah, he plays when there's a more compelling actor next to him. That's when he kind of
just
probably gets
just a,
away with, yeah,
yeah, because they're
looking
carrying the scene.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Whereas like Rebecca, I mean, not sorry, Lily James's character, not
Yeah.
isn't to. I don't. I'm not familiar with the rest of her work, but her character is built to be more submissive, so
Hmm.
he has to carry it,
Right.
and he doesn't. I mean, he has more violent outbursts towards her in the remake.
Yes, and that's part of why I was like, I don't understand why she would want to stay with a man who has murdered his ex-wife when he's clearly like shouting at her and like storming off a lot more frequently and leaving her behind.
Accusing
Like,
her of like cheating, like not
yeah,
cheating, but like flirting with Lavelle, like the
right.
cousin. You
Yeah.
question. Whereas in the Hitchcock version, he never did any of that.
He like yelled at her at the costume ball, but that I think was it. And
Yeah,
that made sense because we later learned Mrs. Danvers tricked her into wearing the costume of Rebecca. So
yeah,
it's like, okay, I do understand. And like, even though I would never want a man to yell at me, I get it in this scenario. But
yeah.
yeah, to like remake a film, release it in 2020, and have kind of an abusive man is not a great look.
Yeah, it just doesn't fly these days. And I just don't understand why they made him have more violent outbursts in
Right.
this one, unless it was just, I don't know. It just didn't make sense to me. And what's weird is the movie tried to fight against it by giving it that weirdly faux feminist thread. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not just talking about Mrs. Danvers, but towards the end, she's supposed to have found her power. Like you see, they show more love scenes in the remake,
Mm-hmm.
but to me, just seeing how they were choreographed, it showed an equal footing, especially from the beginning. Whereas I feel like, I mean, they didn't show it in the original, obviously, but it should have. I would have. I don't know. It just already showed she was in control of, had a sense of power from the get go as well.
Mm.
So to add that feminist edge towards the end, where she's like, I'm really in my power. I'm like,
Right.
we knew that. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
already got that from the beginning. And because people around you are telling you you're poor, you're lower class, it doesn't seem to affect you because I get a
Right.
sense of self assuredness and power from her already. So maybe it's just a miscasting, or maybe the director was trying to add that faux feminist edge to make it more relevant to
Yeah.
today's audience. It just didn't work at the end of the
No.
day.
Yeah, I thought the end was also interesting of the remake because to me it felt like they had amped up her character too much too soon, because she is like being belittled and then suddenly she's a detective trying to save her husband. And I was like,
That didn't. I know that didn't happen. I don't think that happened in the book. So it's just like yeah. You have to question those choices from that
Mhm.
director, because it's
It's like
like,
he wasn't sure which story he wanted. Oh, I wrote like halfway through, like this feels like two movies smushed together, and maybe that's why is like he hasn't clearly picked how he wants the character's arc or story or persona to be. So it feels kind of like two characters mashed together.
yeah, exactly. If he meant to make a movie about a woman who wasn't in a position of power and then finds it,
Hmm.
maybe that's what he meant to do. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
None of it was believable.
Hmm.
And if he meant to make a horror film, that also didn't work for me either.
Right.
Like we both
Right.
said, we were just bored and had to keep putting it on pause.
Right. I was like, how many snacks can I eat to get through this?
I know, right? It's
Yeah.
like, how many scarves can I crochet? Like, it's
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like when I want to like start playing games on my phone, that's when I'm like, oh, this is bad.
I
Like I
know.
just want to like distract myself.
And honestly, I was excited with the remake at the beginning when they show the famous "Last Night I Dreamt to Manderley" sequence. I dreamt I went to Manderley sequence, and
Hmm.
you see the figure walking to the gate. All of a sudden, there's a light change and everything's red. I was excited at first because I was like, okay, the use of color now. We're using that. The original was black and white, of course.
Hmm.
We're using quick cut edits. And then it was just downhill from the beginning for the rest of the movie for me,
Yeah.
honestly. I was like,
Yeah, I know. It's like, oh, they're doing like a shot for shot in the intro. Okay, cool. Like nice homage. And then
I know. Then I was like, okay, I'm already.
and what's funny is I didn't realize that she was supposed to be English at all, because in like the Hollywood version, since Hollywood used to have that fake movie accent, I just thought they were like that's what they were using. I didn't realize they were also supposed to be English people.
Yeah, Armie Hammer didn't do an accent at all in the remake either. I was like, he's
No.
supposed to be British.
Right, like he's supposed to be a rich British guy, but yeah, this was a tough remake to get through.
Yeah, I apparently it was one of the most watched movies the first weekend it came out. Then it got kicked out of the top 10 after the second weekend. It was
Mm.
just like, yeah, because I don't, no one.
I'm curious, like how long do you have to watch? Like, do you just have to watch the first 10 minutes and then it can stay in the top 10, or do you have to finish it?
I think so. I think it's 4 minutes, and they count it as a view.
Wow.
Yeah. So they could watch the opening sequence, be like, this is cool, then get to Monte Carlo and be like,
Yeah.
this is boring.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I also thought Mrs. Van Hoffer, I briefly mentioned it, but I didn't think that she needed to be so aggressively condescending in the remake. But
Yeah.
that goes back to the class hammering in, I guess, that the director is trying to do. But I was like, she is unnecessarily cruel. Why would you hire someone to like be your companion if you're gonna be rude to them all the time?
I know. It didn't make sense to me. Because in the original, she wasn't cruel. She wasn't
Right.
nice to her, but she also wasn't just unnecessarily cruel. But
Hmm.
she also still looked down on her.
Hmm.
And I
Right.
think
You understood that she knew that she was like, we're not on equal footing, but yeah, she wasn't like, no one's gonna love you and whatever other mean things she could think of.
Yeah, and I think that comes as a result of us now living in a time when that's just not relevant to our culture so much in
Hmm.
ter- in those class distinctions. We're just,
Yeah.
so I think people try to overplay it when back then it was like more understood,
I
right?
feel like though you could have done something in the remake, like sending her on ridiculous errands or something, so that we get the point that she's more expendable without having to be cruel.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know. And I guess it was also you have Ann Dowd, the wonderful Ann Dowd playing her, and you want to give her something to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't know where the intention started with making her character go in that direction, whether it was written into the script,
Right.
whether the director wanted that, if it's something the actress chose. I
Yeah.
don't know, but I'm curious about that choice too.
Right. Yeah, because it seemed extra.
Yes. Oh, the scene with her friends sitting around and they're like laughing at her behind her back. But that's the thing. I didn't
Yeah.
feel it either. You could
Mm-mm.
add a scene, you could put, and you can add an unnecessary scene, but you could still have it hit emotionally. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel that.
Especially if they're supposed to be like these busy, wealthy women. Why are they spending their time talking bad about a companion, a hired
Servant,
companion?
exactly. Like
Yeah.
they wouldn't even look twice at her, you know?
Right. Yeah. The most
Yeah.
they'd be like is like she's not good at her job or something and then move on.
Yeah,
Not spend their precious time talking smack about her.
exactly.
That's true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was an odd.
But generally, just about the story, I think it's very cool that she doesn't have her own first name.
Yeah.
I think that's a really neat part of the story. That's not something that we experience unless it's like an extra character. They get no names, but to have one of your two leads throughout the film have no first name of her own and only get a name once she's married is a very interesting and neat.
Tells a lot about the character, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
and also how everyone around her views the character. But also interestingly in the book, she receives a letter and she's like, "Oh, they actually spelled my name right."
Mm.
And there's some discourse around that because I went on cliffsnotes.com. There's some discourse that's either like, okay, either people find her so insignificant and so unimportant, they just don't care to spell her name correct, or she could have a very different name, a
Mm-hmm.
very foreign name that might cause people to be like, I don't know how to spell that name.
Oh,
Which is
interesting.
another interesting point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a
Mm.
part in the book where she's like, they actually spelled my name right. Wow.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's why I was also like, yeah, she could be a foreigner of some sort, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Foreigner in England. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that could mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I think it's fun, like it's a comical moment even though it's dramatic in the movie when I don't know if it happened in the remake, but in the original when the phone call comes in and asks for Mrs. De Winter and she's like, "Oh, she died last year."
Yeah.
And then realize like, "Oh, that's me." I was like,
Which is
that
funny.
was funny.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, that's me. Hey.
Right.
And of course, there's some like weirdly, like what we would consider some toxic masculine traits nowadays in the original, like him being like, "You
Hmm.
little idiot, I want to marry
Right.
you." Yeah.
Yeah. I know there are some moments where I'm like, wow, okay.
It's like, it's, I was like,
Yeah.
but it's he. I feel like his performance makes it make sense. The time period and
Hmm.
the point of view of the time period make it make sense, as well as Joan Fontaine's characterization as well makes it make sense.
Hmm.
I think he does call her a little fool in the remake, and I just didn't buy it.
Yeah.
I'd be like, Lily James, slap his ass,
Right.
not his ass, but slap the shit out of him, like.
Right. Which, yeah, from like if they're trying to do the feminist twist, that still doesn't make sense because she could say something to be
Yeah,
like, oh, I'm your honey, not a fool or whatever thing they could think of,
exactly. I don't think the feminist twist needed to exist in this kind of a story. I think what Hitchcock really found in the original was, let's be real, we at some point you kind of think, wouldn't it be nice if I just married some rich guy and didn't have to worry about paying for shit for
Of
the rest of
course.
my life? That's kind of like a weird, like not a female goal, but like a fantasy of some. Like men can fantasize about what kind of women they want, right? You could
Hmm.
fantasize about some rich guy sweeping you off your feet, You marry him after 2 weeks. Now you got all this money. Great. I think Hitchcock found that in the original, that female fantasy, and turned it into horror in this way. Like, this fantasy is actually, this dream life is actually not what it seems. I didn't feel that in the remake.
Right.
Because it wasn't a dream with everyone being like, you're poor, you're a servant. That dream life just never existed for her in the remake.
Right.
So
there's no realization that, oh, this is actually hard work, and I have to play like this respectability game with everybody, and
there's no
play
way
this character that I'm not. I can't be myself because of this class hierarchy. I have to blah blah blah. Yeah.
There's just a lot of, I don't know. I was looking at Wheatley's prior work. He did a lot of horror films beforehand, but like not like Hitchcock's psychological horror. Like it seems more like shock horror what he did.
Yeah, I looked at it too, and I was like, I don't know what any of this is.
Right. And I was like, how did he get this job?
That's always where my mind goes. Is like, how do you go from like directing a few random TV episodes and like horror films no one's ever heard of to a Netflix film that costs a lot of money based on like wardrobe props,
locations,
historical cars, like all these things.
And you've got Kristen Scott Thomas and Ann Dowd in your movie, and it's I'm like, how do you do that?
Yeah. I wonder, like, if they're... I'm going to check my notes real quick. Oh, they also made Mr. Favell way creepier, I thought, in the remake.
Yeah.
And
first of all, the mustache. Come on.
Like, Laurence Olivier had that mustache, though, in the original, but you're like, okay, it's the time period that they're actually making the movie in, so I'm going to let it slide.
Yeah.
Plus, he can pull it off. Most people can't pull it off. And
this
in the remake,
not pull it off.
It's just, and it's weird, and like they added a whole horse scene.
Yeah, for Max to get mad about later.
Right. Yeah. It's like, there's nothing really to this scene except that, he's going to take it as if like they had a date later. But other than that, I got nothing out of the scene.
I know. It was just like, okay, so you just made this character super creepy. And
like, I'm going to touch you while we're on the horse. So it's like, okay.
Whereas in the original, he goes by the window and then climbs in through the window.
He has like a more playful, like he seems more playful in the original, while we later learn that he's really kind of dastardly. But you have this more interesting arc for him in the first. In the latter, it's like, oh, I'm just going to be creepy from start to finish. You're like, okay. We get it. You're one of the villains.
There weren't many arcs that happened in the movie. I think that's why it was just boring. It started in a place like that and just kept going, like in a low place.
Yeah.
And just kept going,
Did not come up.
Even their romance, like I know they showed more scenes of their romance in the remake, and I don't know. It just, I didn't buy any of it, I guess.
Me neither. No, it all felt forced. I felt like the performances from the two leads felt very forced and unnatural. And I don't know if it's just like they don't have on-screen chemistry together or what, but...
Who knows what she found out about Armie Hammer while filming, right?
Yeah. It's like, okay. If she knew anything during, then I get why there was no chemistry.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny. I watched an episode of Armie Hammer on Gossip Girl way back in the day, and Blake Lively just did not like it. Like, you could see her disdain for him throughout. Like, I'm like, you go, girl. Like,
that's funny.
Just
I would not be able to point him out, I think, in anything, just because he looks so basic.
Yeah. I know. And I guess since there were two of him in The Social Network, everyone was like, oh, but
Oh.
Because he played the twins, the Winklevi in The Social Network.
Okay.
I'm just like, if that's what has to make you interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Good luck.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was like the last character note I had, was that Favell was creepy for seemingly no reason from start to finish in the remake.
Yeah, there were just no arcs for anyone. Mrs. Danvers started hating the second Mrs. De Winter. She ended still hating the second. That's how it is through the book, but it just, her arc, it comes to a point in the trial. So in the original, you see how she's just not wanting them to be happy because of that trial. Whereas in the remake, I don't see that. Like, she just kind of, I don't know.
Well, I think in the original, Mrs. Danvers, like, had some internal struggle because, like, she didn't really seem to want to participate in the court case and only did, I forget what, like, inspired her to. I think maybe it was the cousin's letter where she was like, oh, that's why she's going to the doctor. Where in the remake, she was like, oh, it's because of the letter that I'm participating. There was no moment of like, I don't want to get involved in like the court drama, and I don't want to have to like share any secrets of my BFF or whatever. Like, she just dove right in and was like, sure, I'll participate, which seems out of character compared to the original.
Yeah, I think it's just something about the story arcs and the character arcs that just had no peaks and valleys, you know.
And I think that's also why in the original, when Mrs. Danvers, when the new Mrs. De Winter is like, I'm not going to take your crap anymore. I'm in charge of the house. And Mrs. Danvers is like, okay, but then, tricks her later. I think that's also why it's more believable in the original, because it seems like, okay, our lead is finally standing up for herself. And of course, anyone would be taken aback by that and might just fall in line. She doesn't, but it's more believable that they tell it that way than in the remake, where when she like tells Mrs. Danvers like, you're gonna get out or you're gonna like listen to me, it just seems like, why would you ever believe that she would change the way that she behaves towards you because of your one outburst, when you haven't really shown us in any other way that you're stronger or competent at house stuff? I don't know.
It was a weird. I think the book is very. It's, as much as it's not a story that appeals to me, the book is very good at finding that good balance of justifying. And the book had the advantage of the narrator's inner monologue and inner thoughts, which Hitchcock picked up on so beautifully. He actually adapted another one of du Maurier's books to screen.
Yeah, The Birds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Inn, and then The Birds. So I think there was just an
inherent... The Inn.
Yeah. So I think he just, as the director, he just understood what she wanted to say, and with Wheatley, I don't think he understood what she was trying to say.
And he didn't understand what he was trying to say.
Yeah. And that's why the movie was boring as fuck.
Yeah, I know. I don't often like rate movies on Netflix, but I was like, where's the thumbs down option? Because I do not want to get any recommendations. Yeah.
Netflix needs to know about this.
Yeah. At the very least, please do not be like, because you watched Rebecca, you will watch these movies. Like, please do not.
That's like, no, hell no. Save me from that.
Yeah. So overall, if anyone's interested to watch the original only, it's pretty good. It's on YouTube.
I'd recommend it too. Yeah, I'd recommend the original for sure.
But don't bother with the remake. I see that they made, I think, like a couple TV series versions.
I saw it on a televised play.
Yeah, but I didn't check either out, so can't vouch for those. I would be suspicious of them.
I know. I just, Hitchcock had his style, and I think it just meshed so well with the novelist's voice and the way she wrote as well. Because, as I mentioned, as much as it's not a story that appeals to me, her way of writing was really, like, she really had wonderfully descriptive, like, you could see everything that she was doing as the narrator, which is why I also don't mind the novel so much. I couldn't read it when I was 14. Like,
right. I mean, what books from high school were really worth reading in English class, like Catch-22.
I didn't even read
I
that.
read it, could not tell you anything that I learned from it.
I know.
So.
Yeah, I actually can't. Speaking of which, I can't remember most of the books I read in English classes in high school.
It's just remember being like, oh shoot, I got to read this and then write a paper and then it's out.
Yeah. Then it's like out of your brain. It's like, all right, next
Yeah.
book.
Right, exactly. No long-term comprehension from me. But yeah, and I think it's cool that it's on YouTube because it's an older film. So if people want to watch some classics, I think just be aware that because it was released in 1940, it is Hitchcock, has like a little bit of a slower burn.
Yeah, and there are some moments. It is, and it does feel like theater acting on film.
Which is also, I think, due to like how he sets up stages. It's like very clearly choreographed, blocked, and come in this door, go out that door. It very much is like theater.
The one moment in the Hitchcock film, though, where I was like, what the fuck, is when she goes to the boathouse to find the dog at first and meets the guy in the boathouse. I forget his name.
Mm-hmm.
He answers the door and she just walks in.
Yes. So you have no sense of danger.
No. That was the one point in the Hitchcock film where I was just like, what?
Yeah.
She just walks in.
I just need a rope for the dog. Like, that is a weird man's house.
Creepy and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like, he has googly eyes. Like, are you not alarmed? Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
But this was fun. Overall, definitely recommend the first one. And
apparently it won the Academy Award for Best Picture, but didn't win for directing, acting, or anything else, just won Best Picture. So I was like, huh. I don't think this remake's going to get nominated for anything.
No. If you didn't suggest, like, oh, that there's a remake, I don't think it would have ever come across, like, my knowledge at all. I don't think I would have ever seen it, heard about it, known it existed. I think it would have just, like, been in the depths of Netflix.
Yeah, and again, I'm glad you're doing this podcast on remakes because I really think a remake has to be culturally relevant to justify making it now, or you have to find something in that original story's voice and you have to feel like you have something new to say to it now. This was neither of that.
Yeah, or I mean, I don't even ask for that much. I just ask that, like, if you're going to remake it, just make it make sense in the time that it's being told. Like, some movies are basically shot for shot remakes and you're like, that doesn't make sense now.
Yeah.
So I understand, like, you want to maintain the integrity of the original, but if you're not going to do anything new or exciting, why? Why bother?
Yeah. And going back to that tweet where someone was like, whenever there's a Broadway musical that's remade and it still has an all-white cast, I feel like it's the MAGA of like Broadway.
Yeah.
You have to question why. Well, yeah, what was? Are you trying to throw back to a time when half the population would have been, like
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, are you really trying to reminisce the good old days, or
because they weren't good old days for everybody? So
right. Yeah. Yeah, this film was a disappointment. The remake was a disappointment.
Yeah. I always wonder. I wonder if they had recast Armie Hammer and put someone different. But at the same time, like,
yeah, I don't know that alone
would have.
I'm trying to think of like an actor that I would find believable in that role, but I'm only thinking of like, oh, well, like Leonardo DiCaprio only dates young blonde women, so like maybe he would have been a good cast, because the character he's dating is in line, like, it's already believable.
Yeah, right. It's just like, but
yeah,
actually, I do wonder what that would have been like having DiCaprio in that role, because I think he would have made it more compelling. But with that director, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I agreed. Probably would not have worked out.
Yeah. It's almost like the Gatsby role. that he did, right? Like, I didn't necessarily like that film much either, The Great Gatsby.
I don't remember much of it, so I don't think it impressed me.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, like, so many like remakes where I'm just like, why?
Do you want to let people know like where they can find you online, and like if you want to say your IG?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram, LeCarpsicle, LeCarpsicle. And you can also check out my website, marissacarpio.com, to see works I've written and produced, as well as kind of see my background and think films I'm in, stuff like that. And yeah, thank you for having me on the podcast. It was fun watching the Hitchcock movie.
Right. Yeah. Like, two of these 4 hours were fun.
Yeah. But it is, I understand why it is a classic. And yeah, so with the new one, I understand it's valuable to watch films that don't work and to talk about it, you know? So as filmmakers, you could see.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What not to do.
Exactly.
But yeah, thank you for joining me. It's always fun talking with you about movies.
Of course. And likewise. Thank you.